Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Mac, and today we're talking about when to use Chain Lightning versus Lightning Bolt, and the exact target count where you should swap between the two. This is one of the most asked questions I get, and while I have talked about the answer before, I've never really explained the why. And just for transparency's sake, the short answer here is at 2 targets you should be using Lightning Bolt, and at 3 targets you should swap to Chain Lightning. It's a very simple rule, but the reason why isn't necessarily obvious, so I wanted to take today and talk about actually the why behind it with some side-by-side testing. All the numbers I'll be showing are from a 1-minute dummy test, so exact values will vary a little bit, but the relationship between the 2 and 3 targets stays very consistent. So first, let's start off with 2 targets and look at why Lightning Bolt still wins there. This is where things can get a little counterintuitive, because on paper, Chain Lightning looks like it should win here, given that it hits both targets, but when you actually test it side by side, the results end up being almost identical. In a 1-minute test, Chain Lightning did roughly 1 million damage, and the crazy thing about that is that Lightning Bolt did pretty much the exact same number at roughly 1 million as well. Aside from the fact that is an absolutely crazy coincidence, it raises an obvious question. If they're doing the same damage, why are we using Lightning Bolt? And the answer is as simple as Maelstrom. Even though the damage is the same, Lightning Bolt is generating Maelstrom about 20% faster. This means you're reaching your spenders sooner, and since most of our meaningful damage comes from those spenders, faster generation ends up being more valuable than the cleave you're getting from Chain Lightning. So even though Chain Lightning is hitting 2 targets, it's not necessarily giving you any advantage. You're doing the same damage but generating resources slower, which makes Lightning Bolt the better choice. And this is why 2-target cleave is really just your single target rotation. You keep casting Lightning Bolt and nothing about your gameplay actually changes aside from making sure you're maintaining Lightning Rod on both targets. But when you look at 3 targets, the results are a bit more conclusive. Just like before, testing this side by side in the 1-minute window, both Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning generated Maelstrom at nearly exactly the same speed. Chain Lightning reached max Maelstrom in about 25 seconds, as did Lightning Bolt. But now we're in the opposite situation to the 2-target scenario. At 2 targets, the damage was identical, and the difference between the two came down to Maelstrom generation. But in 3 targets, the Maelstrom generation is identical. Which raises the question again, if the resource generation is the same, why are we swapping to Chain Lightning? Only this time the answer is just damage. In the same 1-minute test, Chain Lightning did roughly 1.72 million damage, while Lightning Bolt, on the other hand, only did 948k. So even though we're generating Maelstrom at the same speed, Chain Lightning is doing roughly 55% more damage. This means there's no longer any trade-off. You're getting the same spender frequency, but massively more cleave damage on top, which is why 3 targets is when you have the breaking point of shifting to Chain Lightning. But before we get any deeper into this is where I need to do the responsible content creator thing and mention my Patreon. Because unfortunately, me spending hours hitting target dummies and writing imaginary numbers in my notepad is not a stable career path. So if you want more direct help or just want to hear it straight from my mouth, I do offer Elemental Coaching and Mythic Plus general help over there if you're interested. No pressure, of course, the videos are always going to be free, but it does help support the channel and just helps me justify the completely unreasonable amount of time I spend testing stuff like this. But with the shameless plug out of the way, let's go ahead and get back to the facts. Now at this point, you're probably thinking, okay Mac, if you spent all of this time testing Chain Lightning versus Lightning Bolt, shouldn't you have also tested Earthquake cutoffs? And yes, I should have. And I did. I basically just compared 10 Earthquakes against 10 Elemental Blasts in 3 target cleave scenarios, and honestly the results were conclusive enough that I didn't feel the need to go back and test any other targets. Over those 10 casts, Earthquake did roughly 837,000 damage, and over the same 10 casts, Elemental Blast did 959,000 damage. So even at 3 targets, Elemental Blast is still doing significantly more damage. And that's before you even account for the fact that Elemental Blast also gives you a bunch of secondary stat buffs which are worth a lot as well. So this isn't even one of those situations where the damage is close enough that you can kind of argue either side. Elemental Blast is already ahead on its own with just raw damage, and then it gives you a pile of extra value on top of that with these secondary stat buffs. Now, if we do the math and add a 4th target, Earthquake would jump to about 1.15 million damage, which is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. But even in 4 targets, because Elemental Blast gives you so much extra value through those secondary buffs, I do think there's a decent argument to be made for a couple of nice Aftershock procs we spend on Elemental Blast instead of Earthquakes. It would definitely be a little bit more difficult to pull off, and you'd have a little bit slower of a ramp, but if you're an M+ and things are living long enough, it's probably the play all the way up until 6 targets. But let's go even deeper and get theoretical here. If we take these same Earthquake numbers and just scale them up at 4 targets, Earthquake would be doing roughly 1.15 million damage, and then at 5 targets, Earthquake would be doing roughly 1.425 million damage. Meanwhile, Elemental Blast is still sitting at that same 959,000 damage from the 10 cast comparison. So if we're looking at raw spell damage, yes, obviously Earthquake starts pulling ahead pretty clearly. But the reason I don't think it's necessarily that simple is because Elemental Blast is not just the damage. On top of the hit itself, it gives you a bunch of secondary stats, and those buffs are not small. You get a 14% mastery buff, a 7% crit or 7% haste buff, and all that not just increasing your Elemental Blast damage, but also your Earthquakes and your Chain Lightnings as well, basically buffing everything else you do. So I do think it's a pretty safe assumption that a good chunk of the raw damage gap gets made up by all those extra buffs. Now the one warning I would give here is that Elemental Blast is also significantly more expensive than Earthquake. It costs significantly more Maelstrom, and because of that, it can slow your momentum down if your engine isn't already rolling. And that matters a lot in Elemental because, like I mentioned in a recent video, the spec already kind of has a slow start. So even if Elemental Blast is theoretically still worth pressing in some of these bigger target scenarios, I probably would not recommend sending it right at the start of a pull while you're trying to still get established in your rotation. It's more of a mid-pull thing once your rotation is already flowing and you're generating Maelstrom that you can actually afford to spend without kneecapping your entire setup. So the practical takeaway here is once you get into the 4 or 5 target category, Earthquake obviously becomes your priority, but Elemental Blast may still be worth weaving in here and there because those secondary stat buffs have a lot of hidden value. It's just not something I'd force too early into a pull. But that's a topic for another video. At least for now, with what I tested, 3 targets is still the very clear winner for Elemental Blast territory, and 4 targets where Earthquake becomes your priority. So to wrap this all up, the breakpoints end up being really simplistic. At 2 targets, you're still playing your single target rotation. At 3 targets, you still follow that same single target rotation, but now you swap to Chain Lightning instead of Lightning Bolt. Then once you move into 4 targets and beyond, that's where you transition fully into your AoE, prioritizing Earthquake, while still optionally weaving in Elemental Blast once your engine is already rolling. But that is all I have for today. If this helped you out, make sure to like the video, it really does help a lot. And if you want more Elemental or general WoW content, make sure to subscribe as well. Also, I've been streaming over on Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 PM Eastern, so if you want to just hang out, ask questions, or just watch Raider Keys, feel free to stop by. And if you want to support the channel a bit more directly, I have linked to Patreon below where I offer coaching and additional content, along with a Discord where you can just talk about the spec, ask questions, or just hang out with the community. But yeah, that's all I got for this one, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I will see you in the next one.